Welcome to our review of Parshas Vayeze, Tavshin Ayin and our ongoing quest for an understanding of the workable Ma'aseh Be'amot. So if we take a look at the Haftarah, I mean, it's a little bit shocking on the surface, although you will remember from the past years. Not only do we include here the Parsha of Shabbat Shuvah, Yisrael, word for word, it's not part of that. But before we get there even, we have some very, very tough words. And it isn't what you would think that we would be reading specifically here. The forcing the Malchus on us, you'll see. So this is Chevlei Yoleda, which on the surface we don't really think of as the meaning of this parsha. It seems to us more as a parsha of closure of the period that had opened with the beginning of the Shlosh Avos and with the choice of Yaakov over Esav. But we know that L'maisa, there's a Kabbalah that the period of the Yom Tshuva don't end with Yom Kippur. We keep going. So we come up to Hoshana Rabbah, the Pitkaot. You notice that all of these are tikkunim, essentially of Chaim, because that's the answer to Moshe Rabbeinu's after Yiszocher in Beishiva Hashem in the Maisa Egel. Of course, is the beginning of the entire period. So Shivas B'Tam is bringing us through Yom Kippurim and the beginning of the Luchas, which becomes to us the Zman of Kapora, of Koshan and Mishana. So it's the response to the V'chanotia Sherachon and the Rechamtia Sherachim. And that V'chanoti clearly has to do with the Tzur of the Machane, which becomes Sukkot, which then goes on, according to the Bali Kabbalah, into Hanukkah, and that's why we spoke about the remes to Rosh Hashanah and Hanukkah is that the gematria of Matzion is Rosh Hashanah specifically. So it's as if it's a closure of the entire period, which is also the Inyanim of Chaim, and which we know that the Zohar, the Tikkun Zohar, traces back to our parsha and to the Inyanim even of the Shemen and the Pach Hashem that was with Yaakov Avinu's actions here, in the Inyanim between the Shvatim, which become Kovei Doros, some of the difficult periods, the most difficult periods in Klal Yisrael's history. And so it's not all that surprising when one realizes that also, according to the Bali Kabbalah, the Yerida to love others is the essential Aseret Shuvah. And all of the story in the Zohar was going from the Pnei Yitzchak in Rosh Hashanah, running away into the Aseret Shuvah, and then coming back to Yitzchak, and that becomes the gifts that are given to the Satan on the way to Yitzchak. That's the Seirim, and all of the gifts, many Rimozim there to the Avetis HaKorbanos, the flow, and that's the Segal Azazel, which are the Matanis La'esav HaRasha, which are the Wolodaras, which go back to the beginning of the whole story, with the Shnei Sirei Zim that are brought by Rivka in order to give to Yitzchak, so that in the end, Sov Ma'azeh and Shabbat Techila, and then we get to Sukkot, which Yaakov Avinu comes to Sukkot in order to get back to Esav, to Yitzchak. And okay, it means that this period is somehow a period of integration of the achievements that were up till this point, the moment that he was massacring himself on Rosh Hashanah. Yaakov Avinu went out with the Birchas Avram into this parsha, into Vayeze. And what we came to understand last week was what we thought was really something of a conclusion. In other words, there was this amazing understanding that Yitzchak Avinu gains that is given over at that instant in Yaakov of the difference between, as we put last week, the difference between victims in which the entire story of Yitzchak is to create, in the story of the brachos, is to create a victim on the part of Esau, in which instead of recognizing that the choice of following Yetzer in Bria, and the choice of continuing the way that the world develops itself, is by definition becoming the ultimate victim. You become hostage to what life does to you. And that is the exact opposite of what it is that the Maisa the nature of Elah told us, Shemayim V'aretz, B'Varam. This is what Yitzchak Avinu finally compared last week and told us, that the real told us, Shemayim V'aretz B'Varam, can only be through, as the Shem, what's it? It has to be the victory over the drives that are given to you by my separations, the competitions that are created by my separations, and the intelligence that is provided on a phenomenological level, even the consciousness and awareness that's provided by simple evolutionary forces, which are not considered to be Tolder Shemayim V'aretz, because they present nothing to beyond Bara Hashem Lakim Eretz V'Shamayim. There's no expression of ratios, there's no expression of Bishvil, there's no point in anything. There's no vindication, completion. And Ish HaSholem, again a lesson of the Ramchal, in that nice separation. We've been waiting and waiting and waiting until we get to Tolder Shemayim V'aretz, which are by definition the creativity of Shemayim V'aretz. And the creativity requires Yitzchak Avinu because they have told us. That's exactly that. So told us up until this point was pure genetics. All of a sudden, told us becomes the creative aspects that he thought he was going to get out of the subtlety of the struggles within Esau. And it turns out that recognition, that was the error. And the subsequent accidental creation, the competition through the tefillas and tzedakah of Esau himself, going back to Yitzchak, created an extremely complex model in a world that would then proceed to select itself along with breed. That never was the case before. And there was never direct competition between the subtle similarities of what happens in a world that keeps developing itself, what happens in a world that becomes conscious of itself and seeks to develop itself. They look the same, they smell the same, they taste the same, and yet somehow or other, one is the expression of Maisa, and the other one is the expression of Etisaf Sandi. And this becomes a trip that takes us still going on thousands of years later, and has not as yet been completed. And so the simple meaning of what it is that we thought we were going to get at this point would be the signs of victory. And, we have Yaakov Avinu over here, essentially becoming that Adam HaSholem. It comes out of this parsha. The parsha, remember, is beautifully bracketed. It's bracketed to tell us this is the life of Yaakov Avinu. Because really, Yaakov Avinu here and only here is the story. Once we leave Vayeze, Yaakov Avinu's presence is in a story, but it isn't the story. It's the remark in the past. So the only thing that is, and it's therefore it's one parsha, not any break. No stuma, no psuka. It's one story, and it's the story which is more carefully set apart from everything else with brackets in it. Than just about anything else. The strangest way is with the opening Makan and the closing Makan. We have the opening Rivka statement, go until I call it, with the closing call from Dvorah, the death, basically Dvorah and Rivka at that moment. The contrast, tremendous contrast between the Vayeze in terms of Vayivra, Yaakov's there, and then in the end, which is our Haftarah, and then in the end, the Bericha towards Esau, the fear of Beersheba, as the Medrash says, in which the brachot were refufot biyado because he himself wasn't clear about, so what could he tell Esav? If Esav said, you really absolutely sure that this was honest? You're ready to swear that it was? There's no chance that maybe my tzaka would have been meant indeed to provide me the same options that you had to be able to make the world work. And I wouldn't have been able to answer to Yaakov. Now that he's coming back with such a new clarity that it enables him at the moment of meeting Esav, for Esav to say, Yishal Chashawa, without further discussion. Weird. Which, of course, is what we're looking for in terms of Korah. I said, you can be honest, what is that you have to fight for it? It's not a little bit. This is not what I'm about shaykhs. What I have to this. It's a completely different level. And in the context of that level, you would expect certainly clarity in those differences between the victors and the victims. It's such a beautiful presentation. And not only that, we're, I think, forced to conclude that it's the only place where the Torah tells us what it means to us to be Yisrael also. So this is the story of Yaakov. Because we know on every single prat that Chazal tell us, these are Kovea on others. So if we have the Inyanim of Neder over here, says the Medrash, and he said anybody who ever makes a Neder is coming to Yaakov. Vayeze Yaakov Neder is many Midrashim, right? So this is the idea. Kol Mishu Noder. Lo yeh Torah Neder Elabo. Uh-oh. Your eyes are closing. What are we going to do? Okay, have to stand?
Yeah, I'm not sure how that's going to work.
No? Are you going to go home? If you can handle it? I think you're going to work. Ice cold water.
Just have some
Cat, what's the installation? Cat.
And where are we darshan this from? Lamor? Yaakov Neder Lamor. What's the Lamor? Who's he talking to? Lamor means Ladera, says the Midrash. Lamor Ladarot, Shined Nodrim Beit Saratan. The Abu brings a ranch and Ishba La Hashem Nadar La Avir Yaakov. What's it Avir Yaakov? What happened to Avir Avram? Avir Yitzchak, why Avir Yaakov? Same reason. There's Tolah et HaNeder v'Misha Batarbo Techila. It's all about Yaakov Avinu's field of this behavior. But of course, everything that we learn is the yesod of Kadesh Noach Mikadesh B'Banav. The idea that Eretz Yisrael becomes part of our actual body. And that's the Chiparat Matoa Mobitos. This special Mitinah that was given only to Yaakov as a separate Ulazaracha Etain, a separate Mitinah Zera, besides the Zera Avram that is part of the original Brit Ben Torah. This is something that's completely new. The discovery of Zeshar Hashemayim. That's the Rebbe says, Zeshar Hashemayim, you think you're the only tefillah that's going to be coming here. Harbeit Tzadikim are coming here. Tzadikim Yelkumah. This is Harbeit tefillahs throughout the Deretz. This is going to be the space of all of these tefillahs. But these are things that are not necessarily the story, private story of Yaakov. Obviously not. So that the way in which he experiences everything that takes place over here, including even the Arami Yogidavi. I mean, that's what the Haggadah Shabbat talks about. Including even the Arami Yogidavi becomes such a fundamental part of the individual identity of every Ben Yisrael that it's the only thing that we talk about in the Shabbat. Then we have to be Gurish, that Arami Yogidavi. Which it doesn't even make sense to me. What did he do? What, did he chase after him, yelled at him? What exactly? What was the BK? I mean, he was there for so many years, but you make it sound like he was in the Mitzrayim all the time. It was a 3-hour problem, which, I mean, my gosh, that's a big deal. And yet, somehow or other, of course, that is the ikar of Korach Ma'aseh Midian. Because the Arami Ovid is exactly what we say when we say he got it Yom Lashem Elokechem Pipati Haaretz. That original he got it is an expression of the Teach of Higi, which is the Makor of Yerushas Haaretz. But that's what Michael Abraham. So the male of being nourished this by Yitzias Mitzrayim is meant to be the centerpiece of our identities. I mean, all of these things we start off with here, basically, right at the beginning, and everything seems to be going, beautifully, no? Just at the point, we're discovering the Beit HaMikdash. The Medrash traces all the Ramosim and the Be'eretz and the Simchas Beis HaShoyim on every detail. The idea that the Ruach HaKodesh is Sheira on Yisrael from Nitzavala. The Be'er where this becomes now the connected liberations where you're Sheira. And of course, the nature of Kedusha itself, the Vayisal, love, the Avonim, this and all the Makaras of Kedusha and the Sosashan, right? These things that happen to Yaakov. So this is the Allah Yaniak Tzadik Yisroel, this intense connectedness with the world that makes something unique and a relationship unique and kudash, dedicated. So we're really getting along. That seems, at the beginning of the story, it seems really good. So like you say, Yaakov, wow, and he's coming into town, and he's already, as the Mesilas Yesharim says, throwing him carrots, What the heck? What did I say? I meant to repeat that. Right? He's already being mitake in the world. Excuse me, gentlemen. It's not time to go home yet. Punch your time clock. Whose time clock? God's time clock. What is this? What's going on? You have a job to do the job. Because it's part of his own sense of the importance of the job and his commitment to every moment. So whether it's 14 years in Shein Va'eva, or whether it's 14 years with love on, it's the same dedication, the same I don't sleep for a moment. Every moment is absolutely holy and so on. Great. This becomes a Vaydi'en Olam Makom Hazeh. It is the Beis HaMikdash. And all the get of the intimacy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Cheder HaMitot that we find later on referred to, the Hatzolah of Malchus Yisrael. It's just incredible the number of Muslims that got that point. The story of Yoash, everything is here, and it's going well. And then it not only doesn't go well, it flops on its face, essentially. Because the outgrowths of the Parsha in next week's Parsha are all evident here. The sources are all evident. And what happens over here, and that just this critical moment that we're talking about, the achievement of Yishuv Haaretz, essentially, the achievement of the difference between the victors and the victims, and just the critical moment where we're about to see how called Ma'aseh Gideon, which means, what's the special definition of the Adam for whom the world is waiting? We found a remez in the fact that the waking up of Yaakov is the first waking up that we have since the time that Adam was put into Tardema. He was put into Tardema in order to make a wife for him, which he never recovered from. And here is Yaakov waking up to get a wife for the first time, and he's the Shufrei of Baruch. This is Adam's. In a sense, it's the story of the Hashlama, and the story of the Ma'aseh Higi. And greater than the brackets that we spoke about before, if you think about it, is the most powerful bracket of all. The most powerful bracket of all is the Medrash puts together Vayeze Yaakov Mibershem. Oh, famous Medrash, Malamesh Yitzias Tzadik B'Nam. The Medrash continues straight into Vatetse Aisha about Naomi and Ruth. Exactly the same Andiyamu, exactly the same Lashon. Put that together with the fact that the Medrash says who were the Malach that he saw were big Eilim, big Eilim. Those were Malachim from stone. We didn't have Rishus to go back up because they said by Shkashim at Hamakom, those Malachim are now going up. They have to go, they're going up. because that's the point. The ultimate bracket, of course, I mean, what we're going is to incorporate milk. And all of the inyonim of milk are now coming, which of course is hard, which of course is his confusions and his ambivalence and his sweetness about the correct unhugger when it comes to milk. We're taking care of Aaron's family. Basically. Incorporating the final pieces that need to be put back in. You know, it's great. So there, that is going to end with Milka Malchus, essentially. And in the end, we're going to have from this the application of Ahava, the ticket of relationships, the very thing which in the Zohar was what it was that Yaakov discovered. He says that Beit Elohim is referred to Brit Milah. He was bemoaning the fact that he hasn't been creative in terms of reproduction. He hasn't been creative, and now he needs to be creative and so on. And that the way that creativity is the Beit Elohim itself, which is why we learn out so many dinim of literally of sexual intercourse, the lights, Kiva Hashemesh, and even such things, and many other inyanim that the Gemara, comes to see with the bells or the Kankara, the people into the okay, all these things are here, which is why it's called the Chadar HaMitot. It's the private bedroom, Kiva Yochel, Kotzer HaMetzah Ministaria, you see. And yet, the things that go wrong are these tiny psychological issues, tiny psychological issues in terms of misreading these little relationships. It costs him everything. It costs him his relationship with Leah, doesn't it? In the end, it costs him the life of his wife, because he does not have an understanding of her. That love on him, of what it is, how it is that she attempts to control and to relate to the idea of what her father is, and what the future is. And you should lose that. You should lose his own Ruach HaKodesh. That was horrifying. And you need to have that hero of Yaakov after all of those years to Shrek. And it's all that he wants. Akash Alvin Yes Hashem. He loses that. He loses Yosef. And he loses the most fundamental. He can't get back there. So there's something that doesn't allow him to get back. But Neder ends up being a disaster for him. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says it's always because you're delaying your Neder. That's really the Medrash says over here. It's all very nice to make a Neder and you basically lose him, but the Neder was marching. He was in 4 people that made the door. So him and Yiftach. There's also the Marunism. This is an amazing issue. So why exactly will he be so tripped up on like a little thing? It's a scary kind of situation. So I mean, when you realize that these are fundamental, I mean, you say, okay, I mean, he wasn't completely aware of these things, but isn't the vision that's given there, isn't the vision of the Sulam itself the centerpiece of Kol Ma'aseh V'Yikuyanu? Because remember, it's not only a new theology. It's not just the centerpiece. I mean, the Shema is the Shema. Okay, so fine. It's like sort of things have counterparts that are more meaningful. Is that anything that a person does has a social counterpart. But it's much more than that, because this is the introduction of a completely new relationship of Adam to the Vayipach Ba'av, the original Vayipach Ba'av, which comes to the Tzalmud. Because this is the first time, as we've pointed out many times, this is the first time that you not only have an understanding of the full understanding of what it means to be Merkava Hashem, which appears over here in terms of the Chakika, the Tzur of Yaakov, and the Kisei HaKadosh. This is the mindset. And this is the Malach, the moment. But it's the first time that you have a complex vision of the nature of human consciousness linked to the subconscious. And it's actually an unbelievable vision. Because this is the only time that somebody sees himself from the outside. And so here he is seeing himself, but he's seeing himself asleep. He's weird asleep. Because he sees a vision of himself asleep, which is meant to be that becomes a shaykhus because of that linkage, which absolutely outrages the Malach. The Gemara says that's the way the Bhikshu would go about. It's just like the Medrash says. Can you imagine? This is the guy, you come up to the Kisei carpet, and this is the presence of God in the world, And then you go to say, oh Lord, he's fast asleep. What? And remember that sleep, this is the only sleep. This is the sleep that HaKadosh Baruch Hu demanded. This is the Kibbutz Shemet. This is finding the world blocking him because he needs to stay here and sleep here. It's not except all the Beit but he's going to be Vayeze without Lina. That's ridiculous. Even though he hasn't slept for 14 years. He's like desperate for a good night's sleep, rested this far. And then the next night for the next 20 years, also not going to sleep. What's the big deal? No, that's the point. Again, as we've seen so many times, I didn't know, I wouldn't have slept, but now I'll go back to sleep. That's very powerful. It's a good sense of self.
Use of Allah is referring to Yaakov, Allah is referring to Yaakov.
It's an achotis in the Medrash.
That's how that's.
Yeah. It's not achotis time.
The way the Rambam learns the dream of the beginning of the year, I guess Avraham was also dreaming about himself.
Yeah, but he doesn't dream about himself. He has a dream. Doesn't see himself in the dream.
The whole thing of him running towards the Malach.
No, that's what he experienced.
It's true.
In his dream, this is what I experienced. I don't see myself dreaming. The parallel here is that you have a dream about yourself dreaming.
Okay.
Right. It's a story within a story, which is an extremely rare. It's a contemporary literary device to bring out the issues of consciousness. Right. It's like an Escher kind of picture. It's an early expression of the whole idea of that interrelationship of consciousness with the thing supporting itself in a multiple level, because it's insisting on a subconscious level which is meant to be absolutely unified with what it is to be you on some level, right? And of course, it's there that he fails. Remarkable, and that's the shock of it. Go ahead. Throughout, it's never his conscious mistakes. It's the details of the things that he's responding to as defaults without recognizing that something has to be done about this. So he has a mechanism that prevents him from dealing with things, which we see comes out very powerfully next week in the B'Kei Sh'Yachov, which of course must be a centerpiece to the whole parsha over a year. So that is very, very shocking in and of itself.
And this the idea that he goes all the way to Haran, and he realizes that he didn't stop.
Mm-hmm.
How would he make such a slip? How would he have such a...
But this is before.
Right.
That event is before his sensitivity to what it is that he's doing and what it is that's happening. Because remember, the wake up, the astonishing wake up is the recognition of his multiple level presence, which is part of the essence of the Summah, right? So up until that time, you have a job to do, and you do it. And the focus on what it is that you need to do and how it is that you get it done is a completely different thing. The change afterwards, in terms of this, the Medrash points out, the Fortune point out, the entire change is because of the Chalon, and the Vayeze Yaakov Raglav is because of this. That Vayeze Raglav, in being motivated by his mind, is also tremendous Kiddush. It's like once you feel differently, all of a sudden you're carrying yourself differently. There's a totally different level of flow and achievement, and from that moment he's changed. He's changed, he's engaged. The first part of the Yitzhak, which of course means this, on some level, that's the moment that he was so to engage, brings about a Kodesh Baruch Hu's response of engagement. And instead of things becoming clear with Yitzhak Sadik in that year, the clarity of that it's subconscious, right? The impact that it makes on people. You can't explain that. I mean, you experience it. And you know that there's some profound connection of a human being to his space. And we know there's all kinds of crazy connections that we have from our minds to our physicality. We know that. We know that in terms of actual medical data. We don't understand how it works. We know that it is not just a matter of psychology, because you can account for all the psychological impacts of the placebo effect, and it still works. So something else is happening, things that we don't understand. Okay, so fine. Here we have something that goes far beyond that. That's the level of finding that this is the interrelationship to what was once lose. This is that lose that had a permanence, a solidity. This was the lose that nobody died in. This is the lose that nobody could lie to. This is the lose that some chayav couldn't deal with the fuchad, that nobody could bother lose. It's something that is so profound, so deep, that it's in another sense.
It's 20 hours.
The sort of Kiyas HaMesim itself is the lose. And I don't know, I mean, it's so full of promise. And the promise is so shockingly disappointing when it doesn't happen. So, I mean, what we have, even in Yaakov, I would suggest, I don't have any right, but I would suggest that even in Yaakov, he understands that he never knew himself. There's the deeper meaning of the Anochi Lo Yadat. It's that. V'lo yadati, v'chein yesh v'lo yadati, the Anochi Lo Yadat. On any level, we understand that Anochi is an assertion of the new vision of one's existence. That the Smart says in terms of understanding how Anochi Hashem Elokecha is a mitzvah. And that's the only reason. That's the difference between Ani and Anochi. Allah is kind of the common. You already say, I didn't know Lo Yadati. And then you add Anochi Lo Yadati. Then the pashtus is, and he means I never knew myself either. This is the first time I understand what I am. And that really is the core to myself. That turns the Shufrei of Yaakov into the Shufrei of Adam Rishon. And he sees it. He now knows it. He understands that it's his picture that's on the Kisei HaChavod. So, why is that? Why is that? And then I also mentioned the questions that JJ asked me. This cosmos of Yiddish you think would be powerful and evident, right? Right. I mean, we know it isn't powerful and it isn't evident. In other words, until we have a number of Gemaras. So we have the Gemara of Vayeze Sarah that speaks about when Hakadosh Baruch Hu comes to be done, he basically calls him in Rome. We have that whole beautiful Monty Python scene in the Gemara of Vayeze Sarah. What did the Romans ever do for us? And what did ever do for us? And they say, we made all these incredible things. What about Wall Street? And you have the most amazing response of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, which is, oh, that was just for sex. What? Wall Street is for sex. What is the meaning of it? The only point of having shvakim in the world is lo shiva b'zoma, unless it's that description of victims. So yeah, I understand you're driven to make atom bombs and to develop the world and so on, but I mean, ultimately, it's no different than any monkey is looking at sex. It's a fact, so you're smarter monkeys. What are you telling me? It's great. You're telling me that everything we did, Ela B'Shvil Yisrael, which of course is I'll run this back to the Bereshit, which was social. We also did everything for Rashis. I mean, of course, Rashis is Yisrael, but we had to do these things so they can provide the infrastructure. So the infrastructure was for Yisrael. So the Tanya is, you may be right, but that wasn't what you were thinking. Okay, I understand. Oh, yeah, nothing more like that. Which is the Gemara about courage. So how do we know that courage turned? So we know that courage turned because he said, I don't know, this big tzaddik, look at all these amazing gifts that he sent to us. So maybe actually he supplied all of the karbanas and all of the shemen and all of the sailors and the menachas. How do you say such guys in Russia? The reason is, well, look at the end of the pasuk. It says, in order that you should pray for the Malach and his children. So, big deal, says the Gemara. Somebody says this, you bring up it. Person who goes in and says, Shell's will it's back on the actually you nice. Is it Sadiq gone? This is the way he gives it. Rash says over there. He always gives it. Okay. Big steps now. Or is it Sadiq gone? Is that nice afternoon? This is our precious beginning. In yellow, that's the matter. This is Midrash English that he's making. Right? So there's going to be Aser, and a Roch. This is where we learn out the different tzedakah. Nice for tzedakah. Sela Zul tzedakah is from this part. So the difference between the Tzaddik Gomer and the Russia is supposed to also be this difference of the way that Yaakov understands the getter of the debtor within the context of this difference. Okay, who says? Then he said, well, because, as Rashi explains, look, because if Lamaisa, his child, won't live, so the Ben Yisrael accepts him. He's not gonna start complaining, I gave it tzedakah, scoop here. He doesn't say that. The guy says that. And this is this. Now it's current. Forget it, I'm leaving the church. What do you mean? Feelings don't work. That's it. Fine. It's a sort of subtle distinction. Well, like the Gemara continues, okay, you must come this up. I mean, it's really not fair. I mean, a kunka, if you're probably not to be geek and all of this stuff. I mean, they had all kinds of extra stuff, Now, give us a chance. And we've really evolved, give us a chance. Okay, so then it's going to fight. The mitzvah called Sukkah. We'll give you a chance. The mitzvah called, very simple. Go ahead, do Sukkah. It's a pre-Hanukkah test. Okay, which ends up in Shmini Atzeres, which is, again, the difference between Yisrael and Israel. Fine. They all go to the Sukkah, give all of it. Every building's got a Sukkah, actually. The big 100-story high-rise. That must be really difficult, that everyone should have a Sukkah. But everyone will have a Sukkah. Kodesh Baruch Hu makes it very hot. And they all leave the Sukkah and not cut, Mosotevon, wonderful. I thought the whole point was that Kodesh Baruch Hu brought the Trinity of the Yota. They're trying to give a chance. What kind of chance is that? And then you make it impossible. No, what do you mean? I mean, if Yisrael also would have it anyway. If Yisrael had such a thing, it happens sometimes when Sukkah is very hot. But if Yisrael had such a thing, they're bought them in a Sukkah. That's what you're saying. So they'll never bought them in a Sukkah. That's true. But when they leave the Sukkah, they don't jump around and join, do they? They're sad to leave the Sukkah. These guys kick their Sukkah down and thank God and go back into the air conditioning. No. Again, I'm saying all of creation boils down to the air conditioning. And it's just amazing. I mean, I understand. So these are all tremendously subtle issues. So this is the way it is. Fine. So he writes me an email before Shabbos. What if the guy would have said? What did you want? He didn't say good enough because he talked about the space program. Better. We sent up a Hubble telescope. It cost us billions of dollars. And what did we do it for? Only to understand your mind's gracious of prayer of mindset. We deprived ourselves. We fought it out in Congress. We had to get together with the Russians. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. But I could also say to them, telling me there's nothing there that relates to the desire for Kayak myself. What's the joke? This is a fascinating question. Is it really all that clear to us? That's the case. Fascinating. So I think it's necessary for us to re-examine the nature of the suit. I mean, there's no question. Of course, that's precisely what it would have said. Makes no difference whether it's shvakim, whether it's bridges, whether it's waterworks, or whether it's space programs.
Schwierig in our dog, schwierig in our kid.
Amazing power. The God Maisa Vidya. It was just now, they sent around last week, because it was the anniversary of the United Nations, resolution that violence against racism. They sent around two speeches, amazing speeches, from Ms. Patrick Monet, and the other one was Stan Herzog. Something that he said, Patrick Monet, was such a power. Because it's really, when you read that first Rashi, when you're a kid, you're teaching it to your best school. Okay, I mean, it's a funny way to start the film. Yes, you're going to say, you're going to say to them, well, we created the world, we can do what we want. Like the figures, is that really good? And what do you think the Goyim are going to say? We're not going to say it, right? Like, where would the Goyim, what happens? They're going to call a special conference and they're going to say, oh, the Goyim are going to come together and they're going to. So, you think such a thing is impossible. So, one of these beautiful things that he wrote about, he spoke about the nature of the evil that basically is going to end up destroying the United Nations. And he spoke it out. He says, well, it's a waste of time talking to you. But the only reason I'm doing this is because we want to direct the time to know that not everyone is equal. That we try to fight. It was an amazing thing in Churchillian tones. Beautiful. And he went to each darga why it's evil that he called obscene. It's obscene, not obscene. But then he says that the most obscene thing of all, with that he goes this piece, the most obscene thing is the realization that if there wouldn't have been an imagination, there couldn't have been such a I've been such a moment, such a nice thing. It's the whole purpose of the United Nations. It's only to achieve this moment. What are you going to have everybody saying, God, everyone? So, beautiful. That's the obscenity. Pretend that you're creating peace. But this, in the end, we wouldn't have you, we would have the world. Now we have obscenity. That's the insight. So it's the fact that Rashi uses this, the okay, you have a medrash Haggadah, you know? But the fact that Rashi points you in the direction, and the Ramban takes us to mean the whole together Torah Sa'adam that we were talking about this Sefer Torah Sa'adam. That it's the recognition of this development that in the end you come to understand is different. But that difference is what, it's not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu arbitrarily gives two hands out. It's that what each is shaykh to is his. And that's what we need to see. So somehow or other, we need to achieve a deeper vision. Okay. But that means that this vision of the Sulam, is in fact the necessary ingredient that now the Adam, who is to take the place of Adam Harishon, who has the Shufrei Adam Harishon, who is in the end called Adam Atem, who becomes the Yisrael, which is everything is the Bishvil Yisrael. All of that is this vision. So what is this vision? Do we understand the Zohar? I mean, it's a difficult thing to understand, right? I mean, maybe in a particular diagram, by the way, the word darga means a rung on a sulam. Remember that. So in other words, the idea of this sulam is what we take for granted, whatever we talk about. So where are you opening like? What's this darga? It's that's your darga. What rung are you on? Literally. So basically, what it means is we need to understand is similar to what it means to call myself because, I mean, you can ask the same question. You know, the famous story of the two Rebbe's children. It's a Shiloh, which one was supposed to be a Rebbe. And one of them comes and says, I had a dream, which our father came to us, dream. He said to me in the dream, I want you to be the Rebbe. And, you know,
Speak English, brother.
so the brother says, listen, if that's what you want, you should have told me, you know. Famous joke. But that's exactly the same thing. What do you mean? Well, I said, you give la amo? But that we have what we have. So you tell them. You tell them. So the human says, you want to say something, tell it to me, don't tell it to them. So what are you doing? Well, I said, you give the amo. It's an amazing thing. It's absolutely stunning. So there's a key in it in a very strange way. The Medrash says, Vayikatz Yaakov Mishnato means Vayikatz Yaakov Mishnato. What's that? Very cute, and it wasn't he was learning in his sleep. Or he reached a Sugya Chamura in Kilayim, so he woke up because he couldn't figure it out. What exactly is the meaning of the Medrash? Vayikatz Yaakov. Is it because he was learning? He told his Mishnah. I was Mishnah shame on me. I would say it's over. That's what you want to compare Mishnah to? And Mishnah didn't sleep. So you do. And the truth is that yes, Mishnah is being sleep. It's not just strange. Because the nature of the power of the subconscious vision is always a gather of Mishnah. That's the point. What is Mishnah? Mishnah is a framework in which you don't really understand. And because if you try to replace it with definition, it's going to be bad. But destroying the world. It's Mavala Everyone. I guess he'll make mistakes himself. No. Because it's missing the basic structure of reality. So it's in the same way that the Gemara says that Rebbe Siddur and Mishnah is connected to 6 questions. The same pasuk is basket. Why is it careful? That's sure it's cosmos for that. Becomes the 6 questions that each individual is asked us. So every element of the Seder becomes a question of what's your vision of reality? And that's that it's an incredible quote that if I keep forgetting you said it. Remember? One about it's the only question. People think it doesn't matter what a person's vision of reality is. Oh. It's okay, a guy wants to rent a room from a landlady, and that's supposed to his philosophy of life. And he shows you your income, and he shows you he has that the police record. Brings a couple of recommendations. The only question is what's his philosophy? There's no other. Everything is secondary to that. And that Vayankat's Mishnah taught that that has to do with nature of Sunnah. It's a very profound idea. Because what it means is that the structure of the Sunnah is a complete change in the perception that Yaakov has of himself. And not only that, but it's that change of perception. No matter where you are holding it, it's the knowledge of this love and the fact that you understand that that's where you are located that changes the identity of the Anochi Lo Yadati, not only to him, but of everybody else. And more than that, it's exactly what it is that we literally experience, fundamentally experience inside in terms of our systems. Because the difference of the vision of an awareness on a suma, for the simplest way, is that what it does is that it extends your consciousness very. And most people don't do that. If they have a vision of awareness, so an awareness that extends horizontally. It may be horizontal in terms of history. It could include time and space. It's not a question of only the spatial awareness. But the nature of consciousness is that somehow or other the brain becomes both the observed and the observed. Right? This is what happens to your mind. That you at one time become the observed and observer. So that's a very strange experience, which nobody can quite define, and is not a logical experience, though it's phenomenological consciousness, in which plenty of animals have that sense of the logic of, if that's a mirror, then that must be me in the mirror, and therefore if there's a smudge on my face, it's not on the mirror, it's on my face. That does not require more than the logical interpretations of the meaning of what's happening. So I need to understand that it's possible to be reflected in a mirror. But it does not mean that I need to be simultaneously the observed and the observer. I can conclude that. And it still works as a useful phenomenological consciousness. It doesn't mean that I can make plans. It means that I can get data from the outside about myself, which otherwise not I have to get. I only get data about things around myself. Here it's about me. Oh, I'm dirty. So I'll clean. It's to see even birds doing this. They're here and they go clean themselves. Not all birds. No, not all birds. Not even all individuals of species that are capable of doing that. Fascinating.
Oh, my sister.
Yeah, it's individuals or it's individuals. Straight out for the record.
Which one?
Personal moment. Irresistible. Right. Well, yeah, it's individuals. Minor birds, the minor birds. Not all minor birds. Only individuals. That's astounding. So that means it's a parallel to the distinctions in human consciousness. But here we have a completely different sense. And that sense of the recognition of the way in which your reality is embedded within other levels of reality, things that only became evident in terms of mathematics. Now, we always believed, until we mathematically proved otherwise, but we always believed that we could determine whether something was true mathematically. Right? Because it always seemed very clear this is true, but people took for granted, understand? I mean, that's the Declaration of Independence. It's self-evident. And how could not be true? Everybody's expectations. I mean, these are such a sights. I mean, you have to be insane to argue with these sights. We're going to start analyzing whether I can prove these sights. This became almost the dogma of absolute truth, to the point where the Ramban says, look, You expect me to be the farish over here like Euclid, but forget it, don't read my book. I can't come to that much regular proof. That's what you're right. No, that's not the way Torah works. You have to use a little bit of judgment, and it's not going to be true in that sense.
Maybe at the beginning of the Melchamas.
Yeah. Don't read my book. I guess even in those days they had academia. Don't tear them from us apart. That's not proof for me. But
They seriously did. That was Arabic philosophy.
yeah. So
You were saying something about the Koich Achron, probably.
yes, of course.
The
The whole beauty is the accomplish of the judgment, nature of din, shibui bonim, mentas parim, so on and so forth.
The truth does lie within my Achron.
Which is wonderful. A very highly sophisticated recognition of the integration of the observer and the observed in the level of quantum mechanics. But, we'll get to that. But in any event, people actually took for granted until very, very recently that our hush that we have, MS, is something big. Then mathematically it became impossibly to view it as real unless it were on a sulam. It's the strangest thing. Because each darga of a mathematical theory can only by definition be complete if it's viewed from the outside from another darga. But within itself, there goes incompleteness, which proves that you can never prove from within the system the entirety of the truth of the system, because by definition, there has to be something that will be left out. Very strange. And it was probably the biggest shock to humanity ever, even more than, people were not aware of the implications of it, don't even know it exists. But in terms of the sense of what it means in terms of contemporary thinking, and the giving up for an attempt to discover an ultimate truth, so and the shock to mathematics is just beyond description. So for us, it's even difficult to remember what a shock Freud was, or what a shock Darwin was. These were unbelievable shocks in which the entire position of another within the universe was completely shaken and needed to be reconstructed, which created different people, totally different. But the nature of this sulam that Yaakov is shown defines our awareness of ourselves in very strange experiential ways. For instance, in terms of the actual experience of Eretz Yisrael versus Chutz La'aretz, the difference between a multi-dimensional space, which the Sulam implies, in the basic English is called Hamakom, which other things are embedded within, and life without that Sulam, and the Sulam, of course, is defined as coming across the diagonal of Eretz Yisrael. The difference is exactly the difference that you feel when you get out of an airplane and you go into Chutz La'aretz. So all of a sudden, everything goes flat. In terms of your perception, something happens to your perception, and it's very shocking for a few minutes. Most people are not sufficiently aware that they're aware of it the entire time. But the moment of the distinction, the manishtana, is so unbelievably shocking that even children will say, what happened? It's like someone turned off the lights. So that idea, which experiencing four-dimensional space-time is experienced as a collapse of space-time, is very strange. But it's actually the way that we experience our local coming back to Eretz Yisrael, going to Chutz La'aretz. Very, very weird thing. And it has this other amazing implication in terms of how it is that we relate to the past, and how it is that we relate to the future. Whereas a Ben Yisrael sees, I shouldn't say sees, experiences himself as being embedded in a continuum that stretches back to the nature of creation. So whereas to people without this, they really believe that you're going back into dark and dim past when you go to something that's 300 years old. Wow, to us that's this morning's news. It's like, what is that supposed to mean? I mean, we're friends with those people. I mean, don't you feel more friendly with people that lived like 3,000 years ago? Very often, yes. I mean, you know everything about them. You're like, you can walk around with the Rambam for every day your whole life. Can't find many people that you'd like to do that with. And you understand the conversations, you understand, sharing things and how exciting that is and so on. And it's something that is really beyond the levels of life and death, and those are minor issues, life and death. They're just events within that continuum that assign particular place marks for the individual part of myself. But once you're on that sulam, this becomes Yaakov Yerlomi. That's exactly what it becomes. The experience of death is not possible on the sulam. So that's the first aspect of the difference, which, again, you would think is immediately usable as God myself. You act differently, you're capable of Kedusha, and yet it doesn't work. This makes the question much more powerful. We'll break for fire and then come back to reviewing extension.